Welcome everyone, and thank you for being here to this new EOF school appointment. We are really very glad to have today with us Professor Jennifer Nedelsky, professor at the York University Osgood Hall Law School in Toronto, Canada, and former professor at the University of Toronto. We're very glad to have her because she's now a friend of Economy of Francesco, and also I would say a friend of the Working Care Village. So really, thank you, Jennifer, very much for being here today. Before starting, I need to really recall all of you that you will find a link to register to the school in the chat, both in Zoom and YouTube. So feel free to register, and you will find the link posted, many times during the whole webinar. And second technical note, you will also find translations in Spanish and Portuguese in Zoom. So there are also these opportunities available for everyone. So we are ready to start, but before introducing Jennifer Nedelsky, I will leave the floor to Luigino Bruni for a few introductory words. Thank you, Luigino.
Thank you, Domenico. Thank you also to you, to the other young economists for the organization of these classes, this webinar with Jennifer Nedelsky. That is, I would say, not just one of the professors we invited for the school, but is more, because Jennifer, as you know, Domenico and other people like Alessandra Smerilli, but Jennifer is one of the thinker, one of the professor who most influenced the economy of Francesco, in particular with her idea about care. Because care is not just one word of our time, but is the word of our time. Mm-hmm. Because today, in particular in the COVID pandemic, in the environment crisis, care is the new name of our civilization. And then to put care at the center of our activities, at our villages, at our process is because we knew Jennifer. Then she is one special friend of the economy of Francesco, very special. For that reason, I'm so glad to have the chance to greet to greet all of you who participate in Zoom, part in Zoom and part in YouTube, to these classes, to this webinar with Jennifer Nedelsky. I would just I would say another few seconds, just reminding that with this seminar, also because it's this special seminar, we start a sort of program up to October the 2nd, when we have the second global event of the Economy of Francesco 21st, because we start a sort of journey to prepare to arrive in a special way, well prepared to the second meeting of the Economy of Francesco. How? As you remind, at the end of November event, we concluded with a final statement with 12 points, 12 issues. Some meetings all over the world have been inspired by this final statement. And today, we would like to start this program that we take one statement at a time, 1 point, one issue at a time. There are 12 points, 12 issues, and we will do special events, activities, interviews, video, classes like today on one of these 12 statements. That, of course, today is about work and care, and we would like to remind also that one of our one point of the statement is exactly about work and care. And then one is that we want, as young people, as young economists, to imagine a world where there is the motto of Jennifer: part-time work for all, part-time care for all. But this part-time is matter is also the content of our webinar today. But this issue, this balance, this new culture, this new way of understanding care in relationship to work and the other way around will be the first step of our process towards October the 2nd. Then at the end, Paolo will tell us something more about how to prepare concretely. Maybe we can also read together before leaving that issue, that point of the statement. But now I talk too much. I'm very happy, very glad, very honored to listen together with you, Jennifer and Nedelsky, on this important central key issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Luigino. So let me introduce Jennifer Nedelsky, very short introduction, because I am too really eager to listen to her to her voice and to her proposal. Well, as I said, Jennifer is a friend nowadays of our Economy of Francesco, because we started with her a process and also a work of studying that actually started more than 1 year ago, and we had our first event on Labor Day, so the 1st of May in 2020. It was the very first on-live seminar for Economy of Francesco, exactly trying to discuss this idea of part-time for all that Jennifer will show us in a while. But then during during all this long year that we have that we have spent throughout the pandemic and throughout the attempts to move further also with Economy of Francesco, we really try to dig a little bit more into this proposal, into the potential implications, into potential also complementary policies, issues that could come out. We organized some workshop, for example, involving other firms to try and have a dialogue between Professor Nedelsky and some top manager of firms that could be involved in this kind of proposal. And we also had a workshop recently, more or less 1 month ago, and at the end of April, in which we tried also to explore the implications of a potential complementary measure, that is the universal basic income. So a lot of work, a lot of issues that we try to put on the table. But the starting point is what Professor Nedelsky defined as a problem related to norms, because the part-time for all proposal starts, as we will see, from a normative problem. So a problem of norms that need to be revised and amended. The norm that care is a burden that must be carried only by one part of the family, of society, of the world. This is not true, because as our title of the event says, care for the earth. So care is something that it's really deeply intertwined with every individual on this earth, and also with our planet. So care is something that should be really carried and shared by everyone. And that is what I read as one of the core issues in the proposal. And more, I would also add that as Jennifer puts in the introduction, I'm not spoiling your book, Jennifer, just reading a really very small passage that you shared with us. Part-time for all is a proposal that everyone does paid work part-time and unpaid care part-time, but its outcome would be time for all. And I think this is really great, because the crucial point is that what we really need, what we really find as scarce is time. And we rush for more time, we rush for, for everything that actually, shrinks our life within choices that may also become detrimental to our welfare. Because if this proposal could be put in place, Jennifer says, as the pace and stress of life recedes, health, peace, and daily pleasures expand. So there is time for reflection about what matters. This is what I found really, really touching in the introduction. And as a really final note, let me just, share a personal note, because Jennifer shared with us also a personal note about the origin of a hair proposal, and and I would like also to share that care is something really important to myself as well, because I mean, I don't know, maybe you know or maybe not, but I also have kids. I have 5 actually, and the burden of care of my kids in my family has always been, felt as something that it is not something, that is just on the shoulder of my wife. This is something that we decided together as young people, even though maybe we hadn't, secure jobs. I have no tenures, and so but this is something that because we wanted a family, we wanted together, and we think we really think that care is something that we need to carry on together. So that's why I'm really very sympathetic with your work, Jennifer, and that's why I'm really glad to hear now what you have to tell us about this proposal. Before leaving the floor to Jennifer, just a very simple technical note. Now we will have this speech by Jennifer Nedelsky. At the end, I will introduce 3 discussants from the Working Care Village that will have we'll discuss a little bit the main points, and then we may also open the floor for the general discussion. So thank you very much to everyone. Thank you, Jennifer, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be once again back with the Economy of Francesco. I think it's such an important project. So I'm going to begin with a very brief outline of the key issues in the Part-Time for All book, which is now in the hands of the press. And then I'm going to switch to the way in which that moved me during the onset of COVID to focus on care for the earth. I actually stopped writing and created a new section. Oh, sorry. Excuse me, just technically.
Sorry,
is there any chance of my not hearing the translation?
Yeah, we are hearing the translation in the main room.
Just 1 second, Jennifer. We solve the problem.
Okay.
Thank you.
La cura della salute psicomentale, quindi questo aspetto visto nella sua integrità, no? L'aspetto del verde, hanno dato delle indicazioni sulla base delle loro anche caratteristiche. Per esempio, Joseph ha parlato molto.
Thank you. Okay, you can hear me though? Yes? Okay.
Yes.
So I paused the writing of the book in last a year ago, April, to add a new section on care for the earth. And that's what I'm going to talk about most today. And then I'm hoping to have a little bit of time at the end to just very briefly introduce you to my latest project, which is rethinking the meaning of property. So let me situate the book. So this is a co-authored book with a political economist, Tom Mallison. And I want to situate our argument that you've already heard the very brief version of in the context of COVID. My sense is that the whole experience of the pandemic has forced people to pay attention to long-standing failures of care, such as for the elderly in particular. But from my perspective, it's even more important that the experience of the pandemic has highlighted the link between work and care. COVID has made it obvious that people cannot get their work done unless someone is available to provide care. When schools and daycares close, it becomes hard to ignore the fact that the economy and our society more generally depend on someone providing care for those who need it. And so now we need to ask, what happens to care when the demands of the workplace ignore the need for care? And this is so important because getting people back to work as we knew it will not address this vital question. Work relies on care, but care is becoming unsustainable because of the structure of work and the ongoing denigration of care. And I would just add that in North America, there's a lot, especially in Canada, there's a talk about, well, okay, maybe we'll finally get universal daycare funded by the federal government. Well, this would be a good thing, but in my view, it's not really the best solution because that model just pictures everybody at work, the kids in formal daycare, everybody comes home exhausted from work, and it's just not a good picture. So the question for us all is, who is supposed to provide the care for those who need it when the ideal worker who employers are trying to hire is still someone whose top priority is work? There are many forms of family, but very few nowadays with someone at home to provide full-time care. Many workers, disproportionately women, have to provide care on top of their work hours. And increasingly, someone outside the family, usually female, often racialized, and or an immigrant, is paid, usually badly, to do at least some of that care in the household. Men in heterosexual couples are helping a bit more than they used to, but nowhere near 50%. And publicly funded care for children, the elderly, and people with disabilities is urgently needed, but will not solve the underlying problem of workplace demands that are incompatible with care responsibilities, as well as a pervasive denigration of care as unimportant and a denigration of those who do it. There are lots of important arguments out there about why women should have equal access to good jobs, and some arguments about how men should do 50% of the care at home, which of course they should, but without changing the structure of work, this advocacy will fail. Women will not be able to meet the standards of the ideal worker, and taking up 50% of the care will feel impossible to both rich and poor men. And to the extent that it succeeds, it will perpetuate unsustainable stress in both workplaces and families. So let me just say a word about the norms that need to be changed, norms about who should do the care, and the value of work versus care. Namely, work is more important. So of course, gender is very important. Women all over the world provide a tremendous amount of the care, and women are part of the subordinate group who are asked to do this. And men often not only don't feel responsible for care, but they don't even recognize the care they require and are relying on. And in many cultures, men still feel embarrassed about doing care. But it's also important to remember that gender is not the only way that societies assign care. Increasingly, paid care especially is considered to belong to whoever is low down on the social scale: immigrants, people who are racialized, people who are born poor. And the denigration of care and the denigration of the people who are assigned to do it is mutually reinforcing. When people look around and see that the lowly are doing care, it comes to look natural that this low-level work is being done by people on the bottom. Sometimes this is justified by the quite mistaken idea that care is low skilled, though everyone who studies it and experiences it know that's not the case. So the other important norm is about what society sees as productive work, the work men traditionally did, which is seen as more important and more valuable than care. People don't recognize that not only is care literally necessary for people's lives, but the work they value so much needs somebody to do the care, to create new workers and to care for those workers and their children and their families. So I see the real challenge as undoing the long-standing treatment of care as of little value, and at the same time, undoing the categories of hierarchy that have been used to organize care. No society will be able to achieve gender equality or equality overall if care continues to be organized around categories of hierarchy. As long as those categories, whether it's race or gender or immigration status, exist, there will be powerful forces to get those on the bottom to do the care for low pay. And another serious harm of the denigration of care is that important people don't waste their time doing it, whether men or now women as well. And the lowly, who do have the experience of care, never have access to high-level decision-making. This creates what we call the care policy divide. One group of people makes the high-level decisions, and a different group of people engages in the basics of care. Okay, so let me just briefly outline how we envision the new mode of norms. So I just want to reiterate that although there would be some legal changes necessary to support part-time work, for example, we're really not talking about state-enforced anything. We're talking about norms. So the idea is that everyone does unpaid care. So we say somewhere between 20 and 25 hours, and that includes care for yourself. When children are young or parents are elderly, most of the care may be in the home, but the care commitment is constant. When those demands are lower, then you join a community of care where people make a serious commitment to mutual care. But this is not intended to replace professional care. So that community could be your neighborhood, it could be a soccer club, it could be a choir, it could be a community of faith. And then the other part is the norm of a maximum of 30 hours of paid work. And this, of course, is a very big challenge, partly because our employers require that, but also because so many people have internalized the idea that work is where your identity lies. Work is where real contribution is made. Care is just something necessary that's done in the background. And here, let me just add one thing to the nice introduction that Domenico presented, which is it is very important to equally share the burdens of care, but it's equally important to recognize the benefits of care, what one learns from it, and that no one should be excluded from those benefits, which at the moment happens to all the people who are too important to do it. So we need to end the care policy divide. We need to have a world in which everyone is a caregiver, so that all the decision makers will be caregivers and they'll know the real value of care. Okay, so now I'm switching to talking about care for the earth. As I mentioned, during COVID, I took a real kind of break from my work generally to a period of reflection. And one of the things I came away with was how essential care for the earth was. And although we had a few comments about it, we didn't have a whole section on it. So in the human-to-human care section, we talk a lot about what it is that we learn from care, which I won't have a chance to really go into. But the point here is that we need a similar set of questions around care for the earth. First of all, what does it mean to care for the earth? It's not remotely self-evident. And how you learn from doing that care and what you learn from doing that care. And all these issues of learning how to care, what and from care, we see as very closely linked to our core project of revaluing care. So just as we argue that everyone should participate in human-to-human care, everyone who is able, no exceptions because you're just too important, everyone should also share in care for the earth. And the reasons are similar. care is urgently needed, and the basic life-sustaining responsibility of care for the earth should be shared for all. But as with care for humans, equity, that is doing your share, is not the only consideration. People need to learn what can be learned from caring for the earth, just like they need to learn what you learn from caring for other human beings. And we think that a full revaluation of care will only be possible if it includes care for the earth. At the most basic level, we believe the denigration of care generally is connected to the disregard for the earth and the care this living system requires. Caring for the earth, as with human-to-human care, builds the relationship, the capacity to love the earth and to recognize the true mutuality of human-earth care. Without that visceral experience of that kind of connection, of the real mutuality, I do not see how basic assumptions about the earth can be realigned. Assumptions that have been the basis for the catastrophic harm humans are willing to inflict on the earth community. And if we cannot transform our relationship to the natural world from one based on extraction, exploitation, and the priority of human preferences, then we will destroy the habitability of our planet. And then no other kind of reform, however important, including work and care, will matter very much if we've destroyed the life-giving capacities of the planet. So I see this transformation of the relationship to the earth as the heart of what care for the earth means. Now, when I say earth, I mean to include the interdependent multitude of life forms and the geological formations that together constitute the whole earth, which in turn is in relationship with the wider universe. The language of relationship, mutual responsibility, and mutual care is found in many Indigenous authors' writings. I won't have a chance to go into much here today, but I recommend this to you. To seriously respond to climate change, mass extinction, depletion of groundwater, poisoning of river, etc., will take a vast change in people's affect, in their philosophy of life, their core values, and their spirituality, as well as conceptions of the economy and appropriate forms of decision-making and distribution of power, what we would call politics. And I think, again, this shift cannot be accomplished simply by encouraging prudent resource management. The sorts of cost-benefit analysis that might accompany decisions about what counts as prudent use of resources, how to weigh short and long-term benefits, may make sense if the earth is viewed as a resource to be managed and divided up among humans according to current metrics of economy and politics. But such calculus will not make sense if the earth is seen as a living entity in which humans are one among others who live in relations of interdependence with each other, all of whom deserve respect and require care. What is needed for the human relation to the earth is a stance of care, not just resource management. As we've argued, care requires skill, knowledge, perception, receptivity, and wisdom. One cannot provide good care if one is unable to perceive the needs, preferences, and desires of the one cared for. The carer needs to take the perspective of the cared for, and then needs to acquire and use all the relevant skill and knowledge and use it wisely on behalf of the cared for. Now, of course, just what this actually means in the context of caring for the earth is not at all simple or obvious. We need collectively to do the work of what it means to envision right relations with the earth community. And although we have a tremendous amount of science and argument that's been out there now for 30, 40, 50 years, we have been unable to generate the motivation for change at the level of our political leaders, and I think maybe the population as well. So just those moves don't seem to be working. So in part, I think people need to move, they need to understand the harms, but there's actually a fair amount of evidence out there about what the harms are. I think we need to move from an awareness of the harms to something like an intimacy with the earth. Thomas Berry invoked this phrase, intimacy of the earth, and Joanna Macy refers to the wild love of the world. We need to actually connect with that kind of affect. And right now, most people are too disconnected from the earth to have actual experience, either of being nurtured by the earth or of being capable of providing care in return. And I think that small, regular, sustained practices of active care, which could include gardening, say, together with practices of patient, attentive, responsive observation of nature, can be the path. I think it may well be that learning about harm is just not sufficient when it is not supported by experiencing mutual human earth care. And I would venture to say that most Westerners who don't have a connection to indigenous thought find the idea of actively caring for the earth, as opposed to sound resource management, at least unfamiliar and maybe even silly. Many people in urban centers of rich countries do not feel a connection to the earth. They don't experience themselves as recipients of Earth's care, and they don't feel that caring about the earth is something that's even possible, much less an obligation. So let me turn to say a little bit about what most people need to learn. They need to unlearn a human-centric vision of the earth. They need to unlearn a confident, unquestioned sense of the superiority of human beings that yields ignorance and disinterest in the capacities for responsiveness of other living beings. They need a visceral sense of interdependence. They need to recognize and ideally marvel at all the intricacies of different forms of life by engaging with them close up. I think there are profound transformations connected to core ideas about life, identity, success, and responsibility, as well as property and the economy. But we see the transformation as possible, really possible. Ideally, starting in childhood, people would have the experience of being cared for by the earth and receiving gifts from the earth, whether food or play or inspiration, followed by knowledge. And then they need to learn how to care for the earth in return, whether it's by feeding depleted soil in community gardens or cleaning up parks or waterways or planting native plants. There are many things available to urban dwellers as well. Such forms of experiential care do not, of course, replace the need for working for policy changes to mitigate global warming, say, but I see them as a necessary complement, even if they seem, like most forms of care, time intensive. They are ways of caring, attending, and learning from care. There seems to be a wide consensus that nature is important for human well-being, and especially for children who have less and less contact with nature. And I want to just note a comment by one of the educators about nature and children who I read. He said that children today know a lot about acid rain, but very little about the joys of playing in wilderness. So no direct experience of the joys of connection to the earth. I want to note too that the language of love of the earth often appears in the kind of literatures that I was looking at to try to understand better how to learn about caring for the earth. And it's part of the experience of mutuality. And I think it is this mutuality that makes care for the earth fit so clearly into the definition of care that we have offered in the human context, even if the mutual human-earth relationship is not self-evident to those who have not experienced it. Okay, so I think I still have a little bit of time left.
Yes, you have.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So just one more line about the conclusion of this care for the earth, and then I'm going to move to that property part. So like care for humans, care for the earth community builds relationships with animals, with plants, with the earth itself as a living being, and teaches the link between care and relationship. Care builds relationship, relationships require care. The experience of the connections of care similarly disrupt hierarchies of value and teach the creative dimension of repetitive, time-consuming, attentive care. Care for the earth brings vital knowledge about the nature of interdependence in our shared world, as well as the skills in acquiring further knowledge. So now my latest project is on rethinking property. So I'm writing a short piece for a handbook on law and society and the environment, but I'm hoping this is going to be the beginning of another major research project. Right now, property entitlements can be encroached upon, interfered with by environmental regulations of various kinds, and then there's always resistance to that. And what I think we need to do is redefine the meaning of private property so that limits on what we do with property in relationship to the well-being of the earth community become part of the definition of property, not an exception, which can sometimes be legislated. So one form of language that we have in the common law, and I imagine there are variants of it in the civil law traditions, is the language of trust. And already the existing notions of both public trust and private trust have been used. People develop private agreements to maintain their land and bequeath it in ways that it preserves the nature. And there are also notions of public trust. But what I'm trying to suggest is that all property, all private property, should be understood as held in trust for the well-being of the whole earth community, both present and future. Now, human beings are, of course, part of that earth community, but they are not at the top of some hierarchy to determine how the property should be used. Now, of course, there are huge numbers of questions that would arise out of this starting point. To pick that starting point, to build in this concept of trust for the well-being of the earth, will not answer, for example, whether eating animals is all right. It won't answer a whole set of questions about, feeding the people on the earth versus sustaining the planet. So I'm not pretending that this is, and I'm certainly not planning in my little 8,000 word article to solve these problems. I can't see that sign. Okay, anyway, I'm coming to the end anyway. So it's not as though I think I have a roadmap for the solutions, but I think I have a different starting point. And I think it is a plausible starting point. And it's important. I was very happy to see the line starting from the commons, that one of the things I've been looking at is that, of course, property and land has not always been a commodity to be bought and sold. This is a relatively recent phenomenon. So we have a lot in our history. We can look at the history of enclosure of the commons, of exclusion, so that property becomes less and less publicly available. There's less and less of a commons. Although it is interesting, you might be interested to know, I was shocked to learn that about 90% of the land in Canada is actually publicly owned. So it's managed by various forms of leasehold. But so we have a lot of tools in our arsenal available to us, as well as an awareness of legal history and the relatively recent phenomenon of land as commodity to help us in this fundamental rethinking. And so my last point is that I think that a redefinition of property is a way of concretizing this fundamental shift in awareness of understanding human beings as part of an earth community that really has to happen if we're ever going to protect the planet. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. So now I think we can give the floor to our discussant. But well, let me say just a word that the last part was really intriguing. It was a kind of a surprise for most of us. So I don't know if our discussant may have maybe some questions, but otherwise, because really it's really intriguing and interesting. So I will let so Marco go first, because I think he can add some interesting points about the idea of what needs to be learned. So Marco, please go and introduce yourself and then go with your question or comment.
Good. Hi, everybody. First of all, can you hear me? Good. So I'm Marco. I'm a special needs high school teacher in Italy, and I'm a participant of the Working Care Village. So it was for us, let me say just this, it's a pleasure being here. So thank you for inviting me. And it's a pleasure, of course, listening and talking to you, Professor Nedelsky, or Jennifer, let me call you this way, okay? Okay, here's my point and here's my question, okay? As I said, I work in schools, and before you said something about learning how to care for the earth, probably we're also supposed to learn how to care for others, and maybe also supposed to learn how to rethink about property, as you said in the very final part of your speech. So my question basically is, do you think that school might be a place or the place where we can learn how to put into practice your proposal? So can we manage actually also our time, as time is definitely an important part of your theory, of your opinion, so that maybe most of our time at school is dedicated to studying as a sort of work, let's say, but also a structured part of the time that kids and young boys spend in school is devoted to care, okay? So basically, this is my point. And so can we apply this to school? And then let me also ask you if you have any other idea, so in order to educate, to give value to care, let's say. Before you said something about experience, knowledge, action, something like this, okay? So can we apply maybe this structure to care for the earth, care for others, and so on? So this is my point. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So schools, of course, are a tremendously important part of how we learn and where our dominant norms continue to be promulgated. So the first thing I want to say is that I have encountered a couple of other people who work in the care issue who are resistant to part-time for all because they think it interferes too much with private choice. So if you don't want to care, you shouldn't have to. But we could teach it in the schools. So I think that is a non-starter. Schools cannot teach something that are directly at odds with what are the norms elsewhere. They are never in the forefront of transformation, though they can carry it through. So it can't be an alternative to everyone actually starting to do care. So I'm gonna come back to schools, but circle back to where you ended up about experience, skills, knowledge. So on the human-to-human care, I think what we need is for everybody who is starting families to do it the way Domenico talked about, but also to recognize that not everyone will choose to have their own children. And that's part of what I picture about the value of the community of care, is that even if you don't have kids or your parents are not infirm, or your parents live thousands of miles away from you, you form communities of care so that everybody is doing hands-on, face-to-face care all the time, all through their life. So that's another thing I've heard people listen to what I say and they, well, that sounds sort of good, but we can't really be doing care for everybody all the time. How about it's an alternative to the army? You know, you do it for a year when you graduate from high school, maybe 2 years, or you join a care corps like the Peace Corps, but you don't do it your whole life. I don't think that kind of, you know, little one-shot intervention can build the transformation or really acquire the skills and the shift in relationships that come, because it's so the circle is, you know, experience, skill, relationship, knowledge. And what I think people actually, I mean, I think women who care for their children many, many hours a day do know that the quality of the relationship is connected to the care they're giving. But the men who don't do it don't know that. They don't know that they're missing something in the relationship because they're not doing the care. So, so schools could carry this forward. And so now I'll circle back to Care for the Earth also. So I like the idea that care for, first of all, maybe some of the material care, like keeping the school clean, that sort of thing, because it's very important to me that everybody does all kinds of care. We don't have a hierarchy. We pay some poor immigrant to clean the school and you get to play with the babies or something. That's not part of the picture that I have, because that just reinforces hierarchy. So schools could build in many forms of human-to-human care, and increasingly there are schools. There are outdoor schools in the Nordic countries, and actually there's one on the west coast of Canada too, where the kids spend almost all their time outside. That is where all the education happens, so that they build this experience. But it can also happen on a much smaller scale, planting food, learning that you actually receive food from the earth. We all know that, but we don't experience it. As one of the authors I looked at said, when you buy your food packaged in styrofoam and plastic, it doesn't feel like a gift from the earth. How could it? But you could learn about it from actually doing it, and schools could be a part of that.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Marco. Now we have Sarah. Sarah, please, again. So introduce yourself and then go on with your comments. And then just to share a technical note, we will, after Sarah's comments, then Jennifer will answer, and then we will have another round of comments by Francis, and then we will try to conclude. Okay, so please, Sarah, now you can go.
Yeah, thanks, Domenico, and good afternoon to everyone, or whatever your time is at your place right now. And yeah, my name is Sarah, as Domenico said, and as Marco, I'm a participant in the economy of Francesco in the Work and Care Village, and I'm serving as international president of the International Young Christian Workers. And saying that, I also have to say that IYCW in the total, we don't have a real international position on the reduction of working hours for all. Mm. But many of our national movements do. And why is that? On the one hand, it is exactly because of the reasons that Jennifer gave, because we see that really this important unpaid care work, which is done all over the world, especially by women, should be valorized much more. And for that, we do need a reduction of paid work. But it's also because of this tremendous inequality existing in the distribution of paid work. Because on the one hand, we do have these people who are stressed, these people who work long working hours and who always are doing the paid work. And on the other hand, we have so many people who are unemployed. And in that sense, there's many of our national movements saying, yeah, but we need a better distribution of this paid work. Mm-hmm. In order to have also a better distribution of the unpaid care work. But yeah, this better distribution of paid work would also go along with a better distribution of economic resources. And let me just say that this is also part of the notion why I prefer to speak of a reduction of paid working hours and not of part-time for all. Because part-time, it comes with the notion that still, okay, it's part-time, but we also have some kind of full-time, which is still this 48 hours concept, no, or 38 hours concept. And we actually already do have part-time. We have people who are working half-time, we have people who are working like 5 hours per week or 3 hours per day, but this is not enough to make a living. And I think also what Jennifer is proposing here is the idea that it's normal to work only, for example, 30 hours per week. And this should actually be enough in order to have a dignified income. And in that sense, when we're talking about the reduction of working hours for all, we also need to speak about salaries, because there must be one maximum, and really there must be this maximum idea of what people are allowed to own. And I really like this idea of trust. It must be like, if you have some property, it is not your own, but you're actually trusted to have it for the common good. But in that sense, it must also be clear, if we talk about this reduction of working hours, what people are earning with this 30 hours, it must be enough to live. And it must be really also equivalent to really have this, it must be enough in order to live, but it must also be dignified according to the value of the work you do. And in that sense, also the UBI, it would be important, but it's not the answer. Because the UBI, in the idea that everyone would get it, it would not, we need the UBI, and we need a very strong social protection system, but we also need work to be really valorized, also monetary, in the sense that you must really feel that what you're doing is worthful. And that's also actually implying for the idea of care work to be really valorized, because we have millions of care workers also who are doing paid care work. And this is also a group of people who are actually really working in precarious situations right now. And this very not enough valorization which is given to care, it's expressed in this way of how we are regarding the society to unpaid workers, but also to care workers. So yeah, just some humble comments. I'm sorry if I talked too much and exceeded my 3 minutes. Thanks, Domenico and Jennifer.
Thank you so much for those comments. So I have a number of things I want to say, but you are reminding me of a question that I have that I'm hoping all of you economists can think about. So as we start to envision really deep changes in the structure of the economy, so the nature of property, maximum incomes, which I'll come back to, there's a question about whether one can still use market indicators for measures, for a feedback loop about efficiency in a production system or a provision of services. So I know Luigino knows about, there have been moves to get economists working on the areas of NGOs, because many NGOs are only thinking about the benefits they're trying to bring, and they're not asking themselves whether they're doing it in a way that works well, that is efficient about people's use of time and resources. And so that's an example of what can happen if you can't figure out a feedback loop to tell you whether you are managing your time and your resources well for the purposes you have in mind. And the indicators that we use in a capitalist economy is profit. And so people are all the time talking about profit over people. But if we're not using profit as the indicator, what would replace it? And if we are using profit, then we have a different kind of problem. How can we continue to use profit as an indicator, a feedback mechanism of providing information, without giving it the priority that is captured in the notion of profits over people? And so this is going to bring me back to another one of the questions that I think your comments raised, which is where does taxation fit in all this? So the problem with taxation, like environmental regulation, is it comes in after the fact, right? You feel like you earned the money, you owned the property, and now government is taking it from you, or government is telling you what you can't do with it. And there's, you know, particularly in the Anglo countries, there's always a tremendous resistance to that sort of thing. So the question is, how do you, this is not a question I'm planning to answer, but I think you economists can turn your minds to it. That is, where does, do you want to continue to have a big range of salaries, but then you flatten it all down through taxation, right? You get a basically equal level of available disposable income, but you still have this hierarchy of salaries. Or if you try to do it that way, do you still maintain structures of status hierarchy that you don't want? So these are all variants. I thought all of your questions involve these big notions that if we, as we transform the values that underlie the economy, what are we going to do about replacing our structure of economic indicators that we've relied on so long, but are embedded in a structure of values that we want to reject? So let me just say a few things. So first of all, on the issue of care workers who are among the worst paid and worst treated, really dangerously treated all over the world. And then there are the huge numbers of almost coerced labor of young girls and so on, where there's almost no pay at all. So it's a tremendous, the paid and barely paid status of care workers is a huge problem all over the world. And I think that what I think a system of part-time for all can be reliably counted on to change is the pay of care workers who are publicly employed. And I would expect there to be a big shift in the rich countries between the amount of care that happens in the household, where a lot of the abuse takes place, and the amount of care that happens in a formal sector, hospitals or daycare centers or elder care, which is publicly funded, and where we could rely on the revalorization of care to actually provide better wages in the public sector. I'm more worried about the continued exploitation in the private sector as long as there is income inequality, so that poor people will be motivated to try to hire other poor, even poorer people to do the care for them at low wages. So economic inequality is a huge problem. And I share your view that basic income cannot be a total solution. What we say in our book is that some form of economic security will be required for this system to work. And it could come in a variety of ways, in a mixed variety of ways. It could, basic income would make a difference. A big improvement in social services, particularly in the Anglo countries, would make a big difference. Different countries will make different choices about how to try to provide the economic security that's required to make this actually function. And of course, a living wage. And definitely a better distribution of work. I mean, right now, even people who are working, who are not actually unemployed, are often juggling, 3 precarious jobs. So that the irony is everybody is either spending too many hours work or spending too many hours trying to spend too many hours working. But this part I'm actually moderately confident about, because there's more and more evidence that reduced work hours increases productivity. And I also think that the serendipity of the advent of technology and the reduction of existing jobs, so one estimate is the 40% of existing jobs are going to disappear, that rather than trying to figure out how to create full-time, old-term full-time employment for all, what we'll have is an almost natural move to reduced working hours. So my last comment is, I completely agree with you over and over again. This language of part-time for all has been a problem for us because part-time work means bad work. That's what it means to everybody. And so we say that isn't what we mean, but the problem is that reduced working hours for all, first of all, doesn't capture the full, it's just not pithy enough. So I think we're probably stuck with it as the title, but I will actually think about it because, yeah, I agree that what we really mean is reduced work hours, so which comes to be the norm for everyone, right? So nobody would call it part-time anymore, but in the transition, it's the term people both can make sense of, but then also reject because part-time means bad work. Thank you.
Thank you both. Really, thank you, Sarah, for your comments, really, and thank you for your answers, Jennifer. So now we have Francis that is providing some comments, and I will ask, please, Francis, to keep his intervention in, let's say, 2-3 minutes, and because we should finish by, let's say, 5:10 or so. Okay, so even including, I mean, Jennifer's answers. Okay. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, Sarah, Marco, Domenico, Luigi, for this wonderful discussion and a chance to participate. So my job is with CAFOD, the Catholic Aid Agency for England and Wales, and we're grappling with how to weave this idea of an integral ecology into our international programs at the moment. I've also worked a little bit in social care in the past. And maybe in the spirit of this discussion, I should say I'm living with my fiance and her parents in England in an intergenerational but able-bodied household. The sense I get from this really fascinating proposal of yours, Jennifer, is that care is time-intensive labour. It's relational, and it can't be reduced to a series of manageable tasks. And so we kind of urgently need an equitable sharing of this time, hence the proposal, and to restructure work in terms of time, which is really fascinating. I also hear and read that this is kind of the case for sustainable modes of agriculture as well, that there's a kind of labor time intensive aspect to kind of nurturing of the earth, which isn't so reliant on external inputs, soil degrading inputs and things like this. And so I guess I'm wondering if this norm shift advocated by your proposal has a version for agriculture, or has it specific implications for food systems. And also very fascinated by your thoughts on property, because part of what drew me to formulate this question was thinking a little bit about the enclosure of the commons, and reading that before the enclosure of the commons, it was perhaps the case that the commons was kind of, the management of the commons relied on a differentiation of people's time, of people's roles and responsibilities, depending on time, rather than a division of space. So I guess that's a slightly more vague comment, but yeah, I'm just very interested by your thoughts on property. So I think I'll end there and keep it brief. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's going to be okay, part of it, but I'm really interested in what you just suggested, and I'd be interested in hearing more sources of it, but particularly this whole idea of time, because earlier I was talking about how profits are how we measure efficiency, but of course efficiency, I mean, I hesitated to even use that word, right? Because it's all about time, right? And the object of the game is to produce more with less time and fewer resources. But oftentimes the resources are treated as sort of fixed, and what you can manipulate is the time. You can make people work faster, the Amazon workers working to their algorithms. And I actually think that part of the resistance to care comes both of humans and of the earth, comes from this distorted relationship to time. which of course is again relatively recent, right? This is the industrial age and rise of capitalism. It's there are no, then there's lots of people who've written about this. Natural time cycles disappear. The clock replaces it. We learn clock time, and then all kinds of care, including of humans, looks like a waste of time, because think how much you could be producing instead of slowly feeding that baby or that elderly person, who is just not prepared to moving along at a crisp pace, and you can't make them do it, and to do so would be uncaring, right? So there's a shift in relationship to time, which we do talk about in the book, that as Domenico quoted in the first place, that we expect a different relationship to time to happen, and I really like your question about agriculture, because I think our sense of almost all the, as I said very briefly, almost all of the caring for the earth things that I have thought of look like a waste of time. Too much time doing this. Why plant when you can buy the kale at that? It's inefficient. When you think about how much you can make as a professor, why are you, raising that kale? You're kind of, at most you're earning $5 an hour from by saving that. So we have to undo all of those instincts we have about time and efficiency and productivity and what matters. And I think part of this, because then this circles back to some of the earlier questions too, of the cycle of experience, skill, knowledge, relationship, that as we do these things, we start to appreciate what we have acquired, right? What we have learned, the relationships that we have built by investing that time. But it just is never going to look like productivity. So these more sustainable forms of agriculture will look unduly time intensive, right? If that's your metric, then, of course, the first move will be, well, couldn't we get machines to do it? But anyway, so I think that's really, really helpful to be, it brings home the way in which our affect around time is so connected to everything related to care, whether it's the earth or humans. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, really, thank you all. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Francis, Sarah, Marco, and all the participants for this very, 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 very intriguing webinar we had today. Before leaving the final word to Paolo, just let me also spend a very small word to also thank Giorgia Nigri, that is not here today, because she's now not very well, but I really wanted to, to really thank her, because she spent really a lot of time, a good time, about caring for this webinar actually to be made. So yeah, just a word. And now, okay, so thank you really very much. I think we had food for thought for a lot of time with this webinar that is recorded, so everyone can, get it again and again to focus on what is more. Yes, Jennifer, please.
So I just wanted to ask everyone, particularly our panelists, but maybe others as well, to send me resources that you were drawing on and thinking about. So I love this idea about the commons and different relations to time. And so each of you have areas of expertise that are connecting to areas that I'm going into, but don't yet have. So I'd be very grateful.
Well, great. So maybe we can, I think that Paolo can find a way to maybe to gather any, I don't know if people can send Paolo comments, emails, and that we can share among the panelists, and also with Jennifer, if you.
And maybe you can, I think you can save the chat. I can't.
Yeah.
And so
yeah, we will do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, thank you very much. And now the floor is yours, Paolo. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for this very nice webinar.
Really, thanks to you all. And also, I mean, also Domenico spent a lot of time in organizing this, so he's humble, but I mean, so Domenico, Sarah, and of course, Jennifer, thanks for your time, also for the care you put in this webinar, because you were among the keynote speakers who sent many emails trying to understand what exactly I'm going to discuss, so it's great. And now my role, as always, at the end of the webinar is to announce the next guests of the school. Now the school for June is done, but then we will start in July. We will have Bob Sagden at the center of my slide here. He is a professor of economics at the University of East Anglia, and he's going to lecture about his recent book published 3 years ago, The Community of Advantage. Then we will have Yves Capello, she's a French sociologist from Paris, and she's going to lecture about social finance. And then at the end of July, we will have Cristina Bicchieri, she's a professor at the University of UPenn in Pennsylvania, and she's an expert on social norms, so a lot of topics that interest us. Let me remind you also about the summer school, because we have organized like an appendix of this school, so that you have summer school at the end of August, first days of September. It's 1-week program. The applications are still open. There are again still some spots available, even if we are receiving a lot of applications, so you can apply. You can see the slide, in the slide all the information, or you can go on the internet. And finally, as Luigino Bruni was mentioning, I mean, each of these lessons and each of the activities of the Economy of Francesco from, let's say, today until the 2 October will be related to the final statement and common commitment that we presented at the event, online event in last November. And this lesson in particular, we thought it could be related to the 5th point that I read with you: the right to decent work for all, family rights, and all human rights be respected in the life of each company, for every worker, and guaranteed by the social policies of each country, and recognized worldwide by an agreed charter that discourages business choice based solely on profit and founded on the exploitation of minors and the most disadvantaged. Now, you have not to think about these statements as endpoints. These are just principles that the Economy of Francesco wants to endorse, to cultivate. And so we will ask you, and we will ask also to Jennifer Nedelsky in the next weeks, if you can, for example, record a 2 minutes or 3 minutes video in which you comment this principle, perhaps in your own life, in your own experience, or how do you think that the Economy of Francesco can make this principle real? So all the events that we are going to do from today to the 2 of October will be related to a principle. So to conclude now, I will ask Jennifer Nedelsky if she want to say a last word also related to say hello to the EF community, and thanks again, for having me with us.
Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure. I always love being part of these events. But I do want to comment on the challenge of trying to build in attention to the Earth community to every one of the statements. That because if you just try to meet those commitments as if you didn't have to worry about the impact on the Earth, you might do it differently. And so we have to start building it in right from the start.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So thanks also to all the attendees, to all the people that are going to see this, and so see you in the next lesson in July. And I'll ask Lourdes that she's going to launch our final song of the Economy of Francesco School. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Can you still hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
we can.
So please send me an invitation to the July event, because I would. Do you know what day of July that is?
Well, Paolo, I think that Paolo had to go to
Okay.
another meeting, but we can let you. I mean,
Just
in
let
the
me
flow.
know.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's